Hello, friends. I realized while cleaning out the garage this morning, as I had to get to the Christmas decorations out from behind piles of stuff needed to be gone through. And my ADHD hit in, and I thought it was time to just do it all. But anywho, I thought to myself, wow, Donna, you have some owning to do. To those I have shared my story with, you, the listener from afar, the public that has only gotten to hear the other side, but not the side of who I've been in my life to others, to those I love. You see, I realized I shared my truths, yep, but I haven't shared how all that trauma showed up and out of me in my life and what I did, how I reacted, how I acted, period. Sure, those of us who have experienced severe trauma that cut deep enough to cause PTSD, even before we realized it was PTSD, know it wasn't anything we asked for. But we also know that, like an addict in our lives, their expression of the trauma or pain they feel can cut others as deeply as they have been cut. I don't believe it's intentional, or I can say it wasn't ever intentional in my life, and I can say that with a clear conscience. But nevertheless, it cut others, and it cut those I love. I could give you all the reasons, all the rationale, all the excuses, and all the explanations day after day, year after year. But I recognize from so much of my past that none of that heals those you have hurt. It can't heal the scars you have left. That we can only work to be better and hope that new loving skin will grow over the scars we left. Unlike a cancer that makes you visibly ill, weak, and sick, PTSD can leave you looking normal, but acting in a way that appears, mental. Because, it is mental. And seeing a mental illness is just not as easy as seeing cancer eat away at someone you love. Now, some of what greased that PTSD slide into rage is confusion, inexplicable survival fear, and anxiety, I found was also hormonal and blood sugar ebbs and flows. It took me years to discover I was insulin resistant and had ADHD. Those combinations, PTSD, insulin resistance, and ADHD, can really swirl your life around. Constantly second-guessing, never feeling believed or heard, and making that matter so much it consumes you. Explaining over and over and over, hoping this time you will get the words just right, and this time someone will say, "Oh, I get it. I hear you. I see you. You need help. Love, a therapist, medicine. You know what? I'll stand by you because I see you're sick." Not the kind of sick that's described as, they are a sick person for doing X. Not the outcast kind of sick, but the kind like any other disease that is destroying your insides, but silently with no doctors to tell others your diagnosis and when or what is needed to help you heal. Not the kind where others want to come to your bedside and sit with you. Nope, as a matter of fact, it runs people away. I know this. I own this, all while still owning the truth of what I didn't receive in my life, and that what I didn't receive wasn't for me to carry as I tried. That doesn't still negate I hurt many throughout my life. I hurt mostly my family. You know how they say, you hurt the ones you love? Yeah, I did. Why do we do that? Well, in therapy, they say that it is because you are taught, you believe that within the realms of family, friends, or those who say they love you truly, is your safest space. And there is where we often show our dark side, our pain, our ugliness. The first time I felt this rage, this uncontrollable, out of my body, watching myself doing and saying horrid things, was when I was 16. I'd begun having dizzy spells, like really bad, almost passing out dizzy spells. The military doctor at the time said it was from low blood sugar and diagnosed me with hypoglycemia. Okay, seemed to fit at the time. If I ate certain foods like a potato or a piece of chocolate cake, I would go into an extreme lethargic state. Often I would come home from school and be exhausted. I couldn't keep my eyes open. My blood felt like sludge moving through my veins. I would cook dinner, do some laundry for my siblings and dad, and pass out. Like coma, pass out on the couch. I would wake up at around 10 p.m. or later and feel like a living slug. I would often, after waking up feeling like that slug, would go for a run or a brisk walk. Why? Because I figured out that when I moved and circulated my blood, that it helped with the blood sugars and helped oxygenate my blood, so I'd feel better. When I was in those blood sugar states, often I couldn't even form a coherent word. I would forget things, like my brain would go literally blank and I just couldn't think. But sometimes when I felt my blood sugar dropping, I would feel rage welling up, extreme irritable rage. I recall one time standing at the sink washing dishes. I felt a headache coming on, a familiar one that I began to associate with my sugar dropping. My neck and the back of my head would get very tense, so tense it felt like an overstretched rubber band, like someone was stretching my skin on my skull and pinching my neck at the same time. When I felt this sugar drop coming on, I recall saying to my little sister, who had come into the kitchen just to be a little sister, be annoying. I asked her to please leave me alone. I didn't feel well. She insisted on continuing with her little sister jabs, so I asked her again, stating, I really, really don't feel good. I feel angry and frustrated, tense, and I feel like I'm about to snap. My blood sugar is off, and I feel like I can't control this feeling. Please, please, please don't come near me. Not right now. But as little sisters often do, she was only 11 at the time. She persisted. I remember that first blood sugar rage. I turned towards her and with the violent voice of a demon screamed at her. I screamed and screamed and berated her. I called her names. I was demeaning and mad. It had to have been a very scary thing for her to witness and have come at her. Harry was screaming with rage while the whole time I, who I am, felt like I was hovering over my body and not in it. I could remember saying to myself in my head, "What are you doing? Why are you saying all these mean things? Stop, stop, stop." But I couldn't. I just couldn't. I didn't have control over what was coming out of my mouth or how my body was flexing and tense with raised fist. I never hit anyone during those times when I was younger. That I worked hard at not doing because in truth, I'm quite a pacifist at heart, and the thought of hitting someone would just crush all belief in myself and who I thought myself to be. Yet I so know, that those words that came with the rages hurt more than a fist, and they would leave a much deeper scar. Now, add to that stew mix of chemistry in my brain going haywire, my parents had separated this summer. It was June of 1979, my birthday month. My father attempted suicide, of which I'm the one who found his suicide note. I didn't judge him, and I don't share to shame him or bring him any dishonor of who he was in his life. He was depressed after having a heart attack that required a triple bypass. That same day, during the same time I and the police were hunting for my father, my mother went into a supposed disassociated state, behaving as though she had reclused into her childhood, and she believed she was 3 years old again. And in my shocked state from all the trauma, after both of my parents were taken away in an ambulance, I somehow thought that it would be a good idea to let go of all my delusions of childhood innocence, which I cherished, and decided to also lose my virginity. This was all in one day. Then add in just a year later, during a boating accident involving my father, I was raped for the first time by an older guy who offered to help me take our boat home while my father was taken to the hospital. Add that I was also now the full-time housekeeper, cook, mother to my siblings, and pseudo-wife to my father through paying the bills and handling all aspects of our life. He went to work, I did the rest, all while still going to school and band practice. It was all too much. It was just all too much. No one ever took me to the doctor, and I couldn't make an appointment without an adult. I asked, I begged. I wanted to see a therapist also, but life moved on for my parents, and I seemed to become invisible beyond the responsibilities getting done that were now on my shoulders alone. I completely understand that my parents were going through their own emotional trauma from their divorce, their separation and divorce. I just was so disconnected from it. I felt invisible. None of this shared is to demean those mentioned, but more the recipe to a lifetime stew that not only began to boil over, but eventually burned in the pot as it all sat unaddressed for far, far too long. Far too long. Again, I share the story that might seem as though I'm sharing their secrets, and maybe I am, but not out of shame or to put them on display, but to tell the story of truth from a place where others might identify and begin to heal themselves. Seeing that through it all, you can still find a way to come through it and recreate love where you thought love didn't exist. Move forward just a year and a half after graduating, I left the house to go to college at 19. There, in my third semester, I was gang raped, causing so much more trauma. I left school, just left to try and disappear. I really began to spiral down now. I still had blood sugar problems, hormone problems, add in being a young woman with those hormones, and my undiagnosed ADHD, making concentration harder than ever, as now I could barely focus on anything long enough to even tie both shoes. But I stumbled on, thinking I was just a mess, a person who just couldn't get life right. I didn't believe in myself. Heck, I didn't even know who I was. I felt so much injustice, but remained silent about it all because, well, everyone else was silent about it all. There were never any discussions with me about my rapes, none about my blood sugar or health, nothing. So I thought everyone struggled like this, and I was just failing all the time. Those failures seemed to dictate to my brain that I was not lovable or loved, unless I could be better, better, better. So I began digging into myself the best I could. I recall the first self-help thought I had. Donna, in all these situations, what is the common denominator? You. So you have to do something about you if you are going to be accepted by your mother, your father, and by others. I took this thought way too much to heart, and I thought I could control how others were about me, to me, and for me. I thought that if I people pleased them enough, that would make them happy, see me, and love me. I thought if I could just become what they want, I could be someone they wanted in their lives. But that didn't ever seem to feel like it was going to come. My older sister growing up always stuck up for me, at least at the times big sisters should. She would tell me, I love you, Donna. You are like a kite, and I am like the anchor in the ground. I love that you fly high, think wild, out-of-this-world thoughts, and are creative, while I love to stay on the ground. But you know what? I'm here for you. Now, this came along while still knowing I was her annoying little sister, and she was still my big sister who played manipulative games with me. I mean, she could ask me to do anything, and I would, for a chance to be in her company, and fights over silly things, but she always let me know I was important and accepted by her. Unfortunately, the day of all that tragedy, where all fell in at once, she also kind of left. She married, and her life went on. We were still close, but as close as it could be in her new marriage, then soon after giving birth to twin boys. And I found out later in her life, she had her own demons as well through those times. All of this is still just stories of what went into the stew, and again, I own that stew. I cooked that stew, even if others added into the stew. I just didn't know how to get out of the stew or change the recipe. After I left college, within a couple of years, I married at the ripe old age of 23, just a week or so before my 22nd birthday. I was so broken, so unhealthy mentally and physically. I went for the first man that said, "I love you." It was such an unfamiliar expression to me in my world, I bit hook, line, and sinker. I ignored red flags. Heck, I didn't even know what they were because my life was filled with them, and I just became the victim of them. Bullied all the time as a kid, always feeling like the outsider socially and within my family. So I was easy pickings for a man who later turned abusive. I stayed in that marriage for 8 years, with him and I being together a total of 10, until I finally got out. The revelation to get out still didn't come from some massive aha moment that evolved in me into some kind of balanced, healthy being. Oh no, it left deeper scars. I share the stories above because when my therapist diagnosed me as having PTSD at the age of 54, yes, it took until 54 for me to finally reach help and to finally get the poison that was in me that had been seeping out of those scars to begin being drained. She said anyone going through 3 consecutive major traumas would have a very hard time not getting PTSD or some form of mental trauma scarring. When I got out of that marriage, I ended up with my current husband, who laid out a totally open world for me. I could say, be, or do anything I wanted. I began experiencing life in different ways, feeling things I had never felt before, and in some of those feelings and experiences came the flow of all those years of pain, of not being heard, or the health issues being addressed. I still remember I had a little rage almost like I did at the sink when I was 16, but this time it felt a little different. It began to bubble up and I was about to go down that slide of hell, but it didn't seem to come from a blood sugar drop or headache that meant that creeping demon of anger was crawling up my back and about to take over my body. No, this little time, it felt more like a temper tantrum, just anger at life. And there was nothing else I could blame for being on top of that slide. I was getting ready for work one morning, and I was just not a morning person. My body and chemistry just despise having to get up early in the morning and be somewhere, much less work. I had been a stay-at-home mom with my first husband, not by choice at first, but I loved being home with my kids, and I'd gotten used to that. I certainly didn't get used to the abuse, though. Please know that. Here I was in my room, angry that I had to go to work, be somebody, and earn a living. Kind of normal, right? But it wasn't normal for a grown adult to throw a temper tantrum. But there I was, throwing clothes all over my room because I couldn't find the shirt I needed for the skirt I was going to wear. My husband walked into the room, looked at the fit I was throwing, and said in a very calm voice, "When you're done, I'll be downstairs waiting." He drove me to work regularly and the kids to school. I remember after he closed the door, laughing at myself. I just stopped in my tracks and laughed, smiling even, just laughing at myself. I literally felt sane in a way I had never felt before. You see, with my ex, he would bite in. With others, they would bite in and yell back at me. This always just ended with all exhausted from the emotional tirades that would get our adrenaline going as we all invested in the battle. It was like we were all magnetized to the drama, like moths to a flame. But my husband, he gave me a glimpse of freedom that I had never known before, a place where anything going on with me didn't have to become a knockdown, drag-out fight at first. I always ended up feeling ashamed of who I was in the battle, whether they were out-of-body blood sugar episodes or the still not known to me yet PTSD out-of-body rages, and the only way I knew to show my shame was then to flip to pleasing, to make up for the drama I had always just blamed on myself. I didn't know how to separate out of that discourse from drama. I wished I could say that cured it all, that in that space I found healing, and in a way I did. In a way, that was the first thread pulled of a humongous sweater that had been weaved within my being from my start. One would think that it would get better, that the glimmer of normalcy would have caught on and just spread through my body and mind like a sweater-eating virus. But in reality, when you begin to heal, it can take you so far down at first It starts taking you down into the dark recesses you had shut off, or your mind shut off for you so you could survive. Then all the shadows of my demons begin to surface. I had no idea, none whatsoever, as to what I was doing, or the why, really. I would get triggered by messes, by the fear of going broke. You could often hear me say throughout our years of having businesses, in the beginning especially, that we're going to be living under a bridge. The anxiety and fear of not having stable ground scared me to death, like literally to death. After all, I had felt that level of totally being out of control of what happened to me many times, and I clung to stability like a mountain climber to a ledge, except for I didn't have the confidence in myself to know my handholds could be trusted. I can say that every time I felt the fear of falling, it would trigger some kind of rage. Rage because I couldn't find anyone to say, I got you. Not that it was anyone's place in a healthy, self-confident, and self-aware world for anyone to catch me, but it was a codependent need I needed. I would oscillate between thinking I was being a perfect mother to being a pleaser and giving anything to my kids to see them happy and smiling, to being angry, feeling like no one cared what I did for them. I was so codependent, and my years growing up as the scapegoat began to look more like the environment of my youth, and I acted out and lashed out in ways I later discovered to be narcissistic ways. I get now. I didn't know any other way. I did what I saw. I did what I knew. I did what I thought made others normal, but it was far from normal. I would get frustrated that my kids wanted me to spend time with them. Then, as young teens, I would get upset that they didn't want to spend time with me. All pretty normal phases, but I only knew 70s parents that didn't play games with their kids or ask how your day was, or even if you liked the color blue, green, or red. It seemed pretty normal in those days for parents to feel accomplished if they had provided a roof, food, and a bed. The rest seemed to be up to you. I'm sure there are many who grew up in those years, and even decades before, many had the same experience. Children were to be seen and not heard. So when I got to those phases with my kids, I honestly had no clue how to react, how not to react. I didn't know how to take the angry hormonal words, and I know they weren't personal, and not make them personal. Nope, they hit my heart like daggers, daggers from my past, from the bullies and beyond. I didn't know how to comfort in a way that brought comfort, but I will honestly say I thought I was saying the right things until I learned I wasn't, as they would tell me when they weren't helping every time they got mad or hurt, or I didn't know how to just listen. You know, no one really showed me how to listen, as I didn't know what it felt like to be listened to. Still, I remember saying to myself again, Donna, you're the common denominator. And I would struggle and slip, fail and fall, trying to find what the healthy thing to say and do was, all while I was coming unraveled myself. Each year for several years, as the responsibilities grew, as the situations my teens would bring into our lives, I would roar, rage, and flounder in how to be. All I knew is if I had acted that way, I would have had a torn up butt and a wounded ego and self-worth. And I didn't know what to do, but I didn't want to do that. Not that. What was I supposed to do when I felt like myself had never grown up, still past that 16th summer? I was a wounded 16-year-old in a 30-year-old body and brain, running businesses and making appearances to the outside world of being confident and strong. But at home, I would crumble, struggling about how to control my emotional impulsivity. I had been shut down and out for so long, letting my voice loose was like letting a hungry, starving tiger out into a field full of bunnies. It was in my 30s that my older sister collapsed and suffered lack of oxygen to the brain. I sunk into a deep depression, and the world I had created just created people in my house who would rather tiptoe around me or avoid me than to see if I was okay. I own that. I own that my survival mechanism was to push people away, because my proclivity was to fight, not flight, but fighting for my survival just hurt others more. So pushing away just seemed easier than asking for help, when in my experience, help never comes. It just seemed easier to sit in it all by myself, sit and rot if I had to. That year of depression felt like that, like rotting away, and no one knew, cared, or wondered what was going on. Now that is what I felt it was like for me, in my head, in my brain, in my pain. That doesn't mean that if I had learned how to address it better, that there would have been help. But I will never know, as we can't go backwards. So for about 15 years, I became bitter about all I did for others. I was even working with and around nonprofit work so I could give more of myself to please others, hoping that my goodness would be seen and the bad parts were parts I might get loved through. Yeah, it doesn't happen that way. Nope, because just like a drug addict, I had burnt many. And if they were still around, I had created such raw nerve endings at the sight of me or the sound of my voice, they recoiled. Even if they were still around me and said they loved me, that bitterness of injustice, the bitterness of my voice, my being, my soul, built up to volcanic states of rage. It wasn't until about 2018 that I was diagnosed with PTSD. I had reached a catastrophic tipping point. A family situation with my daughter happened. One I am grateful for her today for creating, as she caused me to commit, invest in, and surrender to the healthy world of boundaries. Oh, I had been continually working on discovering my ills, my source of pain, my bitterness and upset all throughout my 30s and 40s. But on that one day when she went away, and for the reason she did and how it all happened, I crumbled in surrender. I let it all out and swore that I would rather die healing all than to continue a life that was scarring my children. It was then that I anchored into getting information and therapy for PTSD, for my children, for my marriage. It was then that the really hard uphill climb began. It was then that I committed to climbing as high as I could to rise above all my past, no matter how long it took, or whatever I would have to surrender about myself, past traumas and pain, because I was losing it all, family, marriage, and all I had ever built. I knew all my intentions in my lifetime were good. I knew that in my heart and my soul, that they came from my soul and desire to be better. A better wife, better partner, a better mother, a better Donna. Still in my journey, not as an instant resolve. It wasn't like the scars were just going to wash off of them, out of their minds and souls from all the pain I had caused. I knew that saying it was PTSD wasn't going to bring cries of, "Oh, now that we know you were ill, all of our hurts and pains are gone." Nope, that just brought on, "You're playing the victim. It doesn't work that way." Nope, it sure doesn't work that way. It took me feeling like I was going to die as those old anchors in layers were being ripped away, and I was the one ripping. Even through those years, there was chaos and rage, and I was seeing it coming back at me, and I knew I was the mother of that seed that grew in them. But I committed that I wouldn't stop, and I could never stop, that every day I had a good day with my kids or my husband and my family was a day I could build on. And the days in which I slipped onto that PTS slide less and less or further apart was a good thing to build on. I often could crumble all that hard work to what felt like back to zero almost. Thank goodness it never went below zero, which would have meant I killed off all I loved and all the love they had for me. And we continued to grow. I continued to grow. And I begun to know what it was more like to have days, months of stability within myself, stability in my emotional impulsivity and instability in knowing my body and self so well and what to do, where to reach out, what a reaching out place looked like. Still on the climb of healing where peace replaced bitterness and anger became just a place for a discussion, not a knockdown, drag-out fight. You see, I write my truths and I get it. I have written way too one-sided for too long. I wrote them to let them out. For every time I have let them out in a public way to strangers, I inevitably have others, strangers, reach out from afar and wide to share their truths. I found that my truths had provided a place of safety to share their truths, their ugliness, their dark side that they had been escaping from as well, and it gave hope. I honestly don't write all I do for me to splash others across a page. Oh, I guess I do write for me in a way, because every truth I shared seemed to have set another piece of my soul free. But truthfully, I know that when I write about those who have been in my life story, they might feel anger for sharing a common but differently experienced story. They may feel shame for the reality we lived in together, or shame for their own actions. I don't know. But my writing isn't about their actions anymore. It isn't about shaming them, and it usually wasn't written with that as the intention anyway. I wished every time I wrote I could write my truths without anyone knowing who they are. But it is pretty easy to know if you know I have a mother, father, sisters, brother, husband, and kids. How do I hide that and tell my story of healing? How do I do that without sharing the pain and traumas that called for the need and desire to heal? I am on the quest to discover that. What I do know, and I mean it, I don't blame anyone. Well, except for my rapist, for my life. I don't fault them. They were living, struggling, and suppressing feelings, pain, and hurt themselves. I don't believe they were intentionally wanting to hurt me. Heck, they may have never even known they did. I thought a long time ago if I could just get them to see, hear, and have illustrations of what I was feeling and the suffering the actions or words caused for me, that somehow they would miraculously see it in the same way as me. And voila! We would live all our lives in peace, hugging and comforting each other within the bountiful fields of empathy. Again, it doesn't work that way, as you have no more control over another than they have control over you, unless we give that control away. I know they all had childhoods. They may have had a bully or a trauma I know nothing about. And one thing I do know about myself, I forgave them and forgive them, as I have forgiven myself. Sure, I might be 58 and the road to today has been long, and it would seem delayed for many. I tend to sometimes even feel a little ashamed, although I moved beyond that feeling fast, that it took me so long, so dang long. And for even that, I forgive myself, because as I said before, I committed to healing so I could be the one to end any generational past history that could cause my children one day of suffering more from me on top of whatever their life throws at them. That I can't live with and won't. So until my last breath, I will continue to heal, continue to grow for my family. And those that have tucked away from me, showing they are not open to heal with me, those who have given up on me and who I really am, I have no control over their choice. It was what was best for them, and I was doing what was best that I could through it all. You see, I know and do own my demons and the claw marks they have left, and I expect no one to endure them or heal in themselves so that they can trust being with me and my story. I don't know their lives. I don't know what they've gone through, and I can accept that peace may come, like it did for me, when they also choose to get off of that dysfunctional carousel our past created. I can accept that they may have to throw me off the ride. All I care about is peace and living with my soul's truth for that peace, and my sharing, my writing brings that carousel into balance for me, ending the blades that spun that cut others, because the secrets of me, even my own ugliness, can't be hidden away in the shadows in the gearbox of that carousel that keeps it moving and keeps it off balance. I don't ever aim to wobble anymore, and I don't want anyone wobbling because of me. That is why I set my truth free. And it is in owning every moment of my life, me owning it, not those who were the character players in my life, of the torn apart, scarred chains that once held me. That's all on me. That was and is mine to heal, no one else's. It's time to start sharing in a better way about how to heal, more than all that I have healed from. Share beyond a way that still might sound like blame or victimhood. Because I am not a victim. At one time I was. Many of us have been, haven't we? Namaste.